Can we start the presentation as it is 10 a.m.?
Yes. So yeah, sorry about that. We're going to go in the order of the program. So we will be starting appropriately. Let's talk about sex. Please, Vicky, whenever you're ready.
All right, so hi everyone. So today my presentation is let's talk about sex and analysis of online sex solicitors' behavior. So here is a quick plan for today. So I'm going to present my study. I'm going to talk a little bit about the methodology that I use, present some of the results and discuss them, and then a short conclusion. So since we only have 10 minutes, let's get started. So this project is a little snippet of my master's research where I studied the MO of various types of online sex solicitors. For those who don't know, online sex solicitation is the act of chatting with a minor online for sexual purposes. These purposes can be to meet victims offline for sexual contact or just fulfill sexual fantasies online. So I analyzed their online conversation to extract how they use strategies to convince underage victims to have sexual activities online or offline with them. But today I will focus solely on the differences between two types of offenders, contact offenders and non-contact offenders. Non-contact are the ones who stayed online, and contact offenders are offenders who use computers to go offline. And I wanted to focus solely on the sexting aspect to it, so we can differentiate offenders based on how they sext, because previous research had stated that they were very sexually different, those two groups, and I wanted to see if that was actually the case. So to do this research, I coded 829 conversation, which I regrouped it into 52 interactions between 18 offenders and 52 victims. The age of the offenders varied between 19 and 59. The average was 32, but with a standard deviation of 12.4, which means that it is a pretty big variation between the ages. Contact offenders were a lot younger than non-contact offenders. All of these offenders were arrested between November 2008 and August 2016. These are all closed cases where the judge found them guilty or they pled guilty. I have 32 non-contact offenders interactions and 20 contact interaction. So what I did was, when I read those transcripts, every time I would see a strategy, which I will explain some of them later, I would count how many times during one conversation and then calculate with overall the entire interaction, how many times the offender used that one particular strategy. The purpose of doing this is that I wanted to see if a contact or non-contact offenders who would use more often these strategies, what were the particularities. So in this presentation, I'm going to focus solely on the sexting strategies, which were the exchanges of visual material. So that's when offenders would ask victims for pictures, sexual pictures, or webcam, so that the victims would perform sexual acts on webcam. Fantasy rehearsal is when an offender and a victim would rehearse a sexual behavior that they would do offline when they meet. So it would just be like, oh, when we meet, we could be doing X, Y, and Z. And they'd be discussing how that would go about in real life. Seeking sexual information is 3 types of questions that we found that offenders would ask. The first one is questions about the sexual past of the victim. So what has the victim done in the past sexually? So try to assess what level they're at. We also have questions about the child's sexuality, sexual preferences and practices. So what does the victim like or dislike, and then what is she used to? The last type of question that we had was also related to sex somehow, but it was more about the victim's physique. So bra size, type of clothes she would wear, underwear, and so forth. Sexual flattery is when an offender would give compliments and affection to victims in order to make sure the victim would continue to participate in sexual behavior, obviously. And direct introduction to sexual content is when an offender would just be very direct in his approach to sexual content. It could be something as the opening line of the chat would just be anal question mark, not even like hello. That kind of one of the extreme, but it was pretty, things like this were pretty popular. Sexual receptivity is when an offender would ask a question to their victim about if the victim would be open to do such and such. Sexual acts, obviously. So is the victim open to doing something like anal or doing something like a certain position? Persistence is a little bit more tricky, and that was a little difficult to code because persistence was when an offender would just keep repeating the same question after the victim would just straight out ignore the question or tell them that they weren't going to answer. So instead of coding it as the first instance, you have to wait until the second instant during one conversation for it to be considered persistent. It was used quite often. All right, so here are some of the results. It is a small table, but a lot of information in there. I did a men with me U test because my distribution were not normal. As I said, the interaction varied between 1 and 394 conversation. And so offenders with over 100 conversation in their interaction had significantly higher count of strategies in all of them. So it made the results a little skewed. So I went with the medium. As you can see, I only have 3 significant results: fantasy rehearsal, persistence, and the number of sexting sessions. The median of all of them, however, showed that contact offender used them more often. Certain are equal, but most of the time, contact offenders use all of these strategies more often. What these 3 strategies tells us is that the contact offenders use these strategies as a way to get victims to go offline. Fantasy rehearsal was just like sexting with preparation to go offline. Persistence is that they showed a lot more persistence when asking certain questions, and they sexted a lot more often, which means that they were prepping the child maybe to go offline. A way to interpret these results is that contact offenders had, on average, a higher number of conversation in their interaction compared to non-contact. So with more numbers of conversation, there was more opportunities for them to rehearse sexual fantasies and show more persistence and have more sexting session. So this is how we can understand these results. However, it is important to keep in mind that with an N of 20, it's a little hard to generalize these results. So in conclusion, as I said, the sample size is limited. However, these are still interesting results because they contradict previous research that stated that sexually offenders were very different when we compare from contact to non-contact. My results showed that they're overly pretty similar, except for the 3 strategies that were a little different that can be explained just by the fact that there's more conversation. There's not a major difference in how they would introduce sex. There's not a major difference in how many pictures they would ask or the type of questions. There was no significant differences if they were looking for a specific type of victims or if they just whoever was online at that moment. One important limit to this study is that police data is not perfect. It's far from perfect, and we are limited to anything that was on the computer or the cell phone when it was seized at the moment of the arrest, or if the victim brought forth their computer. But anything that happened over video chat, we do not have those transcript or phone conversation. However, with the amount of material we had, we can still have a pretty solid understanding of what was happening during those conversations, even though we didn't have everything. Future research should probably just add to the end and try to see if those differences are replicated. And if there are more difference, that would pop out if we had a larger sample. So I want to thank you for your time and also thank our partners, because without the SQ, we couldn't have done this research. So I hope you learned something and weren't traumatized. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vicky. Hasan, if you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Okay. Whenever you're ready.
Oh, okay. I was thinking my presentation would be in the next session. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Can you see it?
Yep.
Okay, in this research, which is at a very early stage at this time, but I wanted to share the earlier findings. I'm looking into the youth transactional sexual behavior. Basically, let me pull that up. Basically, transactional sex is the casual exchange of sexual favors for material gain. This material gain can be money or gifts or any other way of gaining some kind of material at the end of the sexual favor. And it's been, when you look at the issues related to sex among juveniles and children, there has been several issues which are being focused on, like sexual exploitation of children or juvenile sex offenders or sexual abuse is generally studied. But this kind of behavior is at best understudied. And looking into the literature, what I could find out was the studies in the United States have been very limited. I could count 4 to 5 studies in total in the past 3 decades. Even the first studies about transactional sex among youth populations could go back up to 1990s, the first ones. It's been relatively less studied, excuse me. So thinking that it needs to be understood better to prepare effective strategies in understanding and conceptualizing that behavior and improving effective strategies about that. And the literature indicated that there's a correlation between transactional sex among youth and other risky behaviors. This might be risky sexual behaviors or delinquency, or it's also correlated with drug use, victimization, among other health issues. Like the concept has been studied very well under the concept of HIV, especially in the countries where HIV is a much more common problem, like African countries. And as I said, understanding its association with violent perpetration, victimization, drug use, and delinquency is my goal in this study, because the literature is not consistent about those type of correlations or association between transactional sex and those issues, to develop a complete understanding, first of all. One of the problems is to have a good understanding or conceptualization of the problem, because there are other terms, as I said, like the commercial sexual exploitation of children or child prostitution. But in this case, we are talking about a volunteer casual exchange of sexual favors. So it needs to be understood better to develop effective strategies to address the problem. So I'm looking into a data set, a secondary data set that I didn't collect myself, but collected in three states in Northwest United States. And the total number of participants is about 5,647. These are all middle school and high school students, age range between 11 to 21. But the valid number of participants who provided responses to the questions that I'm analyzing is about 1,724. And the dependent variable that I'm including in my analysis is, have you ever received a payment, either a money or gift, for having sex with someone? And it's a binary variable, yes and no. And for the predictor variables or the potential independent variables, I use various domains. So I have a delinquency domain with a scale of 9 items. I have substance use asking for past 30 days of alcohol and drug use, excluding binge drinking. I have various indicators of victimization, especially in the data set, which is about teen dating violence. There is a lot of questions about teen dating violence. So there are questions about victimization. And I have questions about other sexual behavior. And I have questions about family. And when running predictive analysis, I use age, gender, and race as my control variables. At this time, I will not be reporting the results from those, as I'm still working on them. And I will be mostly focusing on the results of bivariate correlations. And the initial findings, first, what I could find is about 5.3% of the valid responses, valid participants, reported involving in transactional sex among participants. Previous studies conducted in the United States indicated prevalence among between 2.8% to 3.5%. This is slightly higher than what they reported, but this might be about methodology as well. And my sample size as compared to the others is pretty large. And the majority of the youth who involved in transactional sex were male, at least the ones reported. And 14% female and 6.5% reported their gender as LGBTQ. And this is consistent with literature as well. Literature also indicates that the majority of youth involving in transactional sex are male. And the majority is white, and the rest is split among various races in the United States. And the mean age of the participants who reported involving in transactional sex is 15.69. And rather than reporting the tables, I wanted to report what seems to be positively correlated and negatively correlated with involving in transactional sex. The first one is delinquency. The positively correlated, in the positively correlated group, I have delinquency, substance use, both drug and alcohol. Separately, they are both positively related. And my delinquency scale is a combination of 9 items, including stealing, simple assault, number of arrests for drug dealing, and stuff like that. I can provide further details if asked. And risky sexual behavior is again 4 items. In terms of risky sexual behavior, I looked at the number of partners in the past year and in the past 3 months, unprotected sex, having alcohol and other substances before having sex are the indicators of risky sexual behavior. These are all positively correlated with transactional sex. I also looked into the youth's specific bullying behavior or teen dating violent behavior. So it's positively correlated with bullying perpetration and cybersexual harassment against a dating partner. Again, a sexual coercion against a dating partner. So these are not only, and so it looks like youth who involve in transactional sex are not only selling sex, but also involved in other types of delinquent sexual behavior, which could potentially be considered as crime from a criminal law standpoint. I also looked into mental health indicators. It looks like anger and anxiety. I have depression, anger, and anxiety in my data set. It looks like anger and anxiety are positively correlated with transactional, involving in transactional sex. However, depression is not. But the question, again, I will be discussing that whether anger or anxiety is the result of being involved in transactional sex, or is it the reason? And many types of victimization, including physical, cyber, and sexual victimization during dating or from a dating partner, is also positively correlated along with cyberbullying victimization. So it looks like transactional sexual involvement is significantly correlated with a large group of other problem behaviors, both in terms of both perpetration and victimization and other related problem behaviors among youth. What are negatively correlated with transactional sexual involvement? That's again,
About 1 minute left, Hasan.
1 minute left?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Parental closeness and parental communication is negatively correlated, meaning while parental closeness and communication increasing, chances for involving in transactional sex decrease. Likewise, commitment to school, which is a good indicator of social bonds. Again, while this is increasing, the risk for involving in transactional sex decrease. And I'm looking at the earlier results, and what I can tell today is the early findings are consistent with the literature, especially in terms of demographics and the frequency. But the problem is the directionality. As I said, if those variables or the correlations can be the result or the predictors. So are they risk factors, consequences, or symptoms of a broader underlying cause? And if the transactional sex is an independent problem behavior or a part of a larger theme are the questions that I'm still exploring. I'm looking into the gender differences as well, whether females are different from other groups in terms of involving in transactional sex. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll do Q&A now. If anybody in attendance has any questions for either of our presenters, please feel free to enter them in the Q&A box. Right now, we only have one for Vicky. And so they write, do you have any advice as to how police could improve their collection of this type of data based on experiences and results from your study and the limitations you encountered therein? Also, how might these results inform, for example, investigations or treatment related to sex solicitation?
First off, thank you for the question. It's a great question. I will try to answer it as best as I can. First off, for treatment, I haven't really worked with that, so I can't possibly answer that, how that could help for treatment. However, all of these cases that I took were part of, it wasn't the case that made them get arrested for it. It was files that we found on the computer while they were arrested. And they were arrested when they were probably chatting with an undercover agent. So that chat was probably fine for court. It's just that I wanted to make sure that my sample was as objective and as telling as possible, because I thought that if it was a police officer pretending to be a minor, it would impact how the behavior of the delinquent, like it would affect the delinquent's behavior. So I was trying to avoid that. My results, however, what they can help with investigation is that contact offenders are not the norm, especially when it's not a cop talking. When cops are chatting, they make the victim, the decoys, a lot more sexually ready and open to meeting offline. In reality, most victims are not, although they are pretty sexually experienced for minors. It could all be all talk, but I was pretty concerned at how quick and how aware they were of sexual behaviors online at such a young age. Also, things move very quickly online. So when you're investigating a case like this, you don't have weeks to do this. You have maybe 2 days at best before something happens, if it were to happen. We had a few who actually traveled to the States to meet victims. We had some that would travel like across Quebec, which for those who know how big Quebec is, it's quite a long way up. So distance for certain offenders was not a concern, even though they talked for about a day. So for investigation is contact offenders are pretty rare, but when they do happen, they are willing to travel very far. So, and you need to be able to communicate with other police force because you may not have time to reach that victim before they do. So I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, we want more information, feel free to email me and I will take the time to answer you in probably a better format than like this when I'm on the spot. Thank you so much.
That's the joy of conferences, though, is answering questions on the spot. Nothing else has come in for either of you. Oh, here we go. So this person writes for you, Hasan. What strikes me is overlapping nature of victim offender in this context of gang culture and the fast changing role from being groomed into criminal exploitation and then becoming the groomer of others. Do you have any thoughts of how we could develop a more nuanced appreciation of victimhood, which doesn't fit the usual profile? A lot of these young people are considered an offender first, and only in hindsight are viewed as a victim of abuse. Many thanks.
That again, that's another good question for our panel, I guess. That definitely is something I'm also looking into. And as I said, if this the concept of transactional sex is an independent problem per se, or a part of a larger theme, and it looks like it is not a standalone problem, or if it's a problem, I mean, there might be various perceptions about that. From a rights standpoint, there might be different. Anyways, but I agree that there's an overlap between the issues predicting or correlated with transactional sex and other types of problem behaviors like delinquency, victimization, violence against the dating partner, bullying, and stuff like that. So that requires to improve the perspectives about that. And as the colleague who asked the question mentioned, we need to improve how we approach to that issue from a larger perspective. At this time, my analysis are still ongoing, so I do not have a concrete thought about that. But my earlier findings indicate that it's much more complicated than it looks. It's not simply selling sex.
Thank you. A question for both of you. Are either of you looking at or have any insight onto how sexual orientation may affect these variables?
Oh, I can go unless you want to go first.
Go ahead, Vicky.
So in my sample, I only had one underage boy, but since I was based at the police station, we got to talking, and homosexual young minor boys are a lot more at risk of online sex solicitation, and it's in the black number because most of them. As I said in my earlier response, things move really quickly, but when it's younger boys, they who are questioning their sexual orientation, they fall into so many traps, and it is very quickly. It's a lot more quick than with girls, and girls take like 24 hours to 48. These can take hours, like especially if the offenders are close, because they're looking for answers. They're looking for friendship, which makes them very vulnerable online, and they're not exactly going on the same websites, so they're just it's like shooting a fish in the barrel. Like it's pretty bad for younger boys who are looking for answers, especially those who are more sheltered and come from families where the sexual orientation, it could be a problem. So that's what we found, that younger boys seeking counsel or quote and answers to their questions are a lot more at risk of online sex solicitation than girls. But it's an under-researched area because most of them will not tell what happened to them, so we can't know much.
And in my part, I'm looking into the frequencies and the descriptives at the beginning. So it looks like a group of participants who reported involving in transactional sex reported LGBTQ as their gender. It's 6.5% of the total, not the total participants, but the participants who reported involving in transactional sex. and I'm looking into the differences between genders. As of now, I could find difference in terms of two predictor variables. One is the level of anger, and the other one is, I haven't reported those, and the other one is the delinquent behavior. Obviously, male participants of transactional sex were more active in terms of delinquent behavior compared to others. And LGBTQ participants who reported involving in transactional sex reported higher levels of mental issues compared to others. So there seems to be some potential to explore the impact of sexual orientation here. Another question that I wish I could answer, but I cannot because the data is a secondary data and there's no information. The literature says, and my initial analysis confirms, that the majority of the participants in transactional sex are males. Are they selling sex to their gender peer, their male peers, or anything else? So that's maybe another question. Obviously, they did not report their gender or sexual orientation. They reported as male, but do they sell sex to other males, or do they sell sex to females, which I guess is unlikely or not very highly likely.
Great, thank you. So we have no more questions that have come in, so I'm going to take that as a sign that we are going to wrap up here now. Thank you both for taking time to share your work with us. Thank you everybody in attendance for coming out this morning. And hey, you've got time to jump over to any of the other streams and pick up on the tail end of any of the other presentations. Thank you again, everybody, for showing up today. Greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for organizing that.
It was a lot of fun.
Happy to do it. Hey, for anybody in attendance who is going to stick around on this stream for our next session at 11, for recording purposes, I have to close the webinar just to get a fresh start on the next one. So please don't think that the stream is going down. We'll be back up at around 11 a.m. Eastern. Thanks again, everyone.